19 March 1945. A storm rolls across the North Pacific like a living, breathing giant. Lightning flashes, thunder cracks, and somewhere inside that black wall of weather, two P-38 Lightnings are falling. They shouldn't be alive. They shouldn't even be flying. But to understand why, you have to picture the impossible sight that greeted Second Lieutenant Robert Shropshire when the clouds finally opened. He looked up through his shattered canopy and saw another P-38 sitting on top of his, fused into him, locked, wing to wing, bleeding altitude. No control, no visibility, no chance. Moments earlier, Shropshire and his wingman, Lieutenant Wallace Smith, were just 10 minutes into their climb through the storm, returning home after a brutal 2,000-mile training mission. Tired, hungry, and already dreaming of California coastline. Then, turbulence struck like a hammer. Radio chatter exploded, visibility dropped to nothing, and in that swirling wall of cloud, two lifelong friends collided at 20,000 feet. Command would later say no pilot had ever survived a collision like this. Certainly not while still strapped inside two aircraft welded together by force alone, yet somehow both men were still breathing. But the worst part wasn't the storm, or the spinning, or the metal crushing around them. The worst part was realizing only one of them had a chance to live, and the man holding the controls was about to make a choice no pilot should ever have to face. Before we begin this journey into one of the strangest, most heartbreaking aviation incidents of the Second World War, let me ask you a question. If you were in Shropshire's cockpit, trapped inside a dying aircraft, ordered to bail out, knowing your wingman couldn't, would you save yourself or stay with him? Think about that as we go forward. It's easy to think this story began in that storm. But the truth started months earlier, with a German bomber that almost nobody today remembers. The Me-264 America bomber, a long-range Luftwaffe dream machine designed for one purpose, to cross the Atlantic and strike the United States mainland. Most Americans never knew how seriously the Pentagon took that threat, but High Command did, and they needed an aircraft that could match the Me-264's range, altitude, and speed. They needed something that could defend home soil long before an enemy ever appeared over it. So they chose the P-38 Lightning. Twin engines, long legs. High-altitude performance matched by almost nothing else in the Allied arsenal. If the Me-264 ever came, the P-38 was the shield meant to stop it. This is why Second Lieutenant Robert Shropshire and his wingman, Lieutenant Wallace Smith, were hundreds of miles out over the Pacific that day. Part of the 440th Operations Group, they were pushing themselves and their Lightnings to the absolute limit. 2,000 miles, brutal cold at altitude, hours of radio, silence, hands numb inside thick gloves, the kind of mission that grinds into your bones and leaves you wondering if you'll ever feel your feet again. But Shropshire and Smith weren't just another pair of pilots. They'd trained together since flight school. They had flown formation so tight, instructors said they could cut a silver dollar in half with their wingtips. And somewhere along the way, that trust turned into something deeper, the kind of brotherhood only wartime flyers understand. Now, on that March evening, they were leading a formation of 10 Lightnings back toward California. Santa Maria Air Base was only an hour away, fuel low but manageable, engines humming in rhythm, the kind of steady flight that makes a man finally relax inside his cockpit, until the weather report changed. Ahead of them, a dark, rolling mass began swallowing the horizon, a storm wall pushing west, taller than mountains, shaped by roaring Pacific winds. Shropshire made the call. Instantly climb above it, punch through the cloud deck, and get clear before the worst hit. It was the right decision. It was also the one that would doom them, because inside that thick wall of cloud was a collision waiting to happen. They entered the clouds like divers slipping beneath the surface of a black ocean. No horizon, no stars, no sky. Just swirling grey and the roar of engines fighting the wind. At 20,000 feet, turbulence hit the formation like a punch. Not a gentle shake, a violent, bone-rattling blast that threw every lightning off balance. Inside the cockpit, Shropshire's harness dug into his shoulders as the aircraft lurched. His altimeter spun. His wings rocked hard left, then right. Visibility dropped to 0. Pilots who had flown hundreds of combat hours later said they had never seen a cloud bank like it. Rain hammered the canopy. Static hissed across the radio. Even the P-38's powerful turbo-superchargers struggled to breathe in the choking air. Radio chatter erupted. "Hold formation, can't see you, brake left." Shropshire steadied his breathing and keyed his mic. "Wally, I've lost visual. Say position." For a moment, nothing, then a crack of static. "Still on your right 50 yards. Shropshire leaned forward, searching through the swirling white. Nothing. Just fog and flashes of lightning. Then, a shape, a blur, a streak of silver cutting through the cloud above him. He only had a second to register it, just 1 second, to understand that the silver streak wasn't passing by, it was falling on top of him. Lieutenant Wallace Smith's P-38 came down like a hammer. The impact was explosive, metal screamed. The canopy shattered, spraying glass across Shropshire's face. His aircraft rolled violently as Smith's propellers tore into the leading edges of his wings. The formation saw it. Pilots screamed into their radios. "Mid-air! Mid-air! 2 lightnings hit, they're going down!" From the outside, it looked like a fatal accident. 2 fighters locked in a broken embrace, spiraling nose first into darkness. From the inside, it felt like being trapped in a collapsing building. Shropshire's controls went dead. His aircraft spun right, then left, then right again. Every warning light on the panel flashed red. He tried the radio. "Wally, do you copy?" A pause. Then a voice filled with pain. "I'm hit in the chest." That was the moment neither man fully understood what had happened. 2 P-38 Lightnings had fused together, locked by force at the wings and tail. They were no longer flying apart. They were one ruined machine, falling, and nobody on Earth had ever survived something like this. The spin slowed just enough for Shropshire to lift his head. Rain poured through the shattered canopy, stinging his face. Every muscle in his arms burned as he fought the useless controls. Then the clouds thinned just a little, and he finally saw it. Not a wing, not debris, a full P-38 Lightning, sitting on top of his. Smith's aircraft wasn't beside him, it wasn't behind him, it wasn't even drifting away. It was mated to his Lightning like a second spine. The violent collision had shoved Smith's wing spars deep into Shropshire's tail assembly. The 2 airframes were jammed together, metal biting metal, locked at the fuselage and trapped at the rear booms. Physics said this configuration should have ripped both aircraft in half. But somehow, they held. It was a miracle. It was also a death sentence. Shropshire tried the radio again. His primary antenna was severed, but by unbelievable luck, the P-38 carried a backup antenna under the belly, a small detail almost no pilot ever needed. Tonight, it would save them. "This is Shropshire." His voice cracked with static. I've been hit hard." Controls unresponsive. A moment passed. Then Smith's voice broke through, thin and weak. My chest. I'm hit." Even through the static, Shropshire could hear the strain in his friend's breathing. Before he could answer, the aircraft jolted again, a sharp, knife-like motion, as though the airframe were trying to tear itself apart. Sparks leapt from a damaged panel. The spin threatened to return. Shropshire shouted, "Wally, deploy your dive flaps. Hit them now." The P-38J and P-38 Liters had a rare advantage: dive recovery flaps, a feature added after early Lightning suffered fatal compressibility dives. Most pilots use them to pull out of high-speed descents. Tonight, they were the only thing preventing two men from going straight into the Pacific. Shropshire prayed. His wingman heard the order. Then, a sudden change. The shaking eased. The spin softened. The nose lifted just enough to level the horizon. Against every law of aerodynamics, the two fused fighters were flying barely like a single monstrous aircraft. The remaining Lightnings formed up around them, pilots staring in disbelief, unable to comprehend what they were seeing. A voice crackled over the radio. "Command, you're not going to believe this, but both aircraft are still airborne." And in that surreal moment, hanging by threads of metal and willpower, two friends, trapped in two broken cockpits, were somehow still alive. Level flight was a gift, but it came with a cost. Shropshire could feel the controls trembling under his palms, as if the aircraft wanted to fall apart the second he relaxed. One engine still roared at full throttle, the only thing keeping the fused Lightnings above stall speed. The other sputtered like a dying heartbeat. Below him, nothing but black ocean. Above him, only the thin hope that Smith was still conscious. He keyed his mic. "Wally, talk to me." "Nothing, just static." Then a faint click. A tiny, fragile sound, the kind a dying radio makes when someone tries to speak but can't. It was enough. Smith was still alive. The other P-38 seconds flew tight around them, keeping pace with this grotesque two-plane creature. Their voices came fast, tense, shaken. "Shrop, we can see fuel leaking off your right boom. Your tail's barely holding. One more gust and you're done." Then command broke in. "Lightning 2-1, listen carefully. Both pilots are to bail out, immediately. That is a direct order." They didn't know the truth. Nobody did. Smith couldn't bail out. He'd taken metal through the chest the moment the canopy shattered. His breathing was ragged, his strength fading. If Shropshire punched out, his wingman would ride two broken aircraft straight into the Pacific. The choice was simple on paper, not in the cockpit: save himself or stay with a man who couldn't save himself. Shropshire closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough to feel the weight of it. He could hear his instructors' voices from flight school. He could hear Smith hollering across the tarmac during training. He could hear the promise every wingman makes, spoken or unspoken: never leave your partner behind. He pressed the radio key. "Negative, command. I'm staying." That sentence was calm. Almost too calm, but the formation heard the truth inside it, a man already accepting the consequences. Shropshire guided the crippled twin Lightnings toward the coastline. The California shore was only 20 minutes away. Their airspeed hung at 160, just 40 miles above stall. One more loss of altitude, and they were dead. One more failure, and the aircraft would roll over. One more hit of turbulence, and the whole structure would tear apart. Then, as if fate wanted to test him one last time, a second storm front appeared. Thicker, darker, hungrier than the first. Shropshire steadied his grip, fighting the aircraft as it trembled under the weight of two broken airframes. He keyed his mic again, voice steady but stripped of hope. "My control system is failing. Fuel pressure. Left is dropping." That was the last full sentence he would ever speak. The storm swallowed them whole. The moment they entered the second storm, everything changed. Rain didn't just strike the canopy, it punched through the gaps in the shattered glass. Wind screamed around the airframe. Loose metal vibrated so violently it sounded like tearing cloth. The altimeter needle dropped. 9,000 feet. 8,000. 7. Shropshire kept one hand braced on the throttles, the other gripping the control yoke with every ounce of strength he had left. He could feel the aircraft slipping, sagging, losing the fragile balance that had kept them alive this long. No response from Smith, not even a click now. The formation could only watch. They flew beside him, powerless, listening to their friend fight a battle nobody had ever trained for. At 4,000 feet, the clouds finally thinned. For the first time in almost an hour, Shropshire saw the faint outline of the Pacific. Beneath them, dark, endless, waiting. The coastline was close. Too close to give up, too far to reach. He nudged the controls again, gentle, careful, almost like he was afraid to wake a sleeping monster. The twin airframes groaned. The nose dipped, then lifted, then wavered. A voice from another P-38 came over the radio, cracked with emotion. "Shrop, you're doing everything you can. Everything." But even everything wasn't enough. Fuel pressure on the left engine collapsed. The needle hit zero. The propeller's pitch sagged, then windmilled uselessly. One engine, two aircraft, 3,000 feet. Shropshire's breathing slowed. Not panicked, not desperate, just steady. A man who knew the end was coming, but wanted the descent to be gentle for the man above him. The lightning pair rolled slightly left. Shropshire corrected. They rolled again. He corrected again. The third time, they didn't come back. The wings banked left in a slow, almost peaceful arc. The nose followed. The horizon tilted. And then the aircraft slipped into the final descent, a smooth, quiet dive toward the dark Pacific waters below. For a long time afterward, the formation circled in silence. No explosion, no fireball, just the storm and the sea. Hours later, when the weather cleared, Navy search crews found the wreckage floating near Santa Maria, two twisted aircraft, broken wings, a torn boom, and only one deployed parachute. It was Shropshire's. They recovered his body. Smith never surfaced. The war was full of heroes. But not many stories forced commanders to pause, lower their voices, and simply breathe. Shropshire's was one of them. When news reached Santa Maria Air Base, the room went silent. Pilots who had flown through hell, who had seen friends shot down, who had watched burning aircraft fall from the sky, even they struggled to process it. Two lightnings locked together, one pilot wounded, one pilot refusing to leave him, both riding a big, crippled, impossible machine until the ocean claimed them. The Navy search crew logged the details with military precision: location, debris pattern, identifiable remains. But it was the hometown newspaper in Nocona, Texas, that captured the truth of it. Lieutenant Robert Shropshire, who lost his life after refusing to abandon his injured wingman, has been returned home with full military honors. Full honors, and he deserved every one. His coffin was draped in the flag. His family stood beside it, hearing stories from pilots who could barely get the words out. They talked about his discipline, his calm, his way of flying formations so tight you could photograph a reflection off his canopy. But they kept returning to the same thing: loyalty. The kind you can't teach, the kind you don't write about in manuals. The kind that turns ordinary men into legends. Historians who later reviewed the incident found it to be one of the rarest dual aircraft survivals ever attempted in World War II aviation, not because they lived, but because they almost did. Eyewitness accounts said that if the storm had held off just 10 more minutes, if the fuel pressure had lasted just a little longer, if the airframes had held their alignment, both men could have made it. Together. But war doesn't grant ifs. It only gives choices. And Shropshire's choice will forever stand as one of the purest acts of devotion in the Pacific theater. He could have bailed out and survived. Everyone would have understood. It was the correct military action. It was a lawful order. But he looked at the situation, heard his wingman's failing voice, and made a different calculation. No one dies alone today. That is the kind of decision that builds the mythology of the greatest generation, a group of men and women forged in an era where duty and brotherhood meant more than survival. And in the middle of a storm over the North Pacific, inside a cockpit filled with shattered glass and failing systems, a young pilot from Texas lived that belief to his final breath. When you step back from the details, the weather reports, the engine failures, the metal locked together like broken bones, the story leaves you with one image. Two P-38 Lightnings, fused by violence, fighting a storm over the Pacific, guided only by one man's refusal to let go. War is full of chaos, full of luck, mistakes, miracles, and decisions made in seconds that echo for decades. But every once in a while, a moment stands out not because of strategy or technology, but because of character. Shropshire wasn't a medal chaser. He wasn't a famous ace. He wasn't writing himself into history. He was just a pilot, flying home in bad weather, until fate forced him into a choice that would define him forever. Command didn't expect him to stay. No rulebook required it. No officer would have blamed him for bailing out. But he knew something simple and unspoken. A man doesn't leave his wingman in the dark. Not when he's wounded. Not when he's scared. Not when he's alone, in a cockpit, slipping toward the sea. And because of that choice, Shropshire became something rare, a reminder of what loyalty really looks like when everything is falling apart. Long after the war ended, long after the aircraft were pulled from the water, pilots in the Pacific still told this story, not as a tragedy, but as a benchmark, a standard, a quiet promise. A lesson passed from one generation of flyers to the next. Be the one who stays. Now let me ask you something, and think on it the way a veteran thinks about an empty seat at the bar. If you were in that cockpit, storm raging, controls failing, a wounded friend trapped above you, would you have stayed? Tell me honestly, because your answer says more than you think.